South Korea is home to many ethnic Koreans from around the world, but not all of them have legal status in the country. Among them are Stateless Koryoin, descendants of ethnic Koreans from the former Soviet Union, who've settled in South Korea but remain without nationality. The Overseas Koreans Agency has announced plans to conduct a fact-finding survey on Stateless Koryoin, marking the first such effort in 18 years since it was suspended in 2007. Based on the survey, the government aims to introduce measures to expand support for this community, including steps to help them attain legal status. To discuss this issue today for Issue in Focus, we'll be speaking with a representative from a non-profit organisation that has been advocating for the rights of Koryoin. But first, to give us a clearer picture of the Koryoin situation, we're joined in the studio by our regular guest reporter, Shim Kyu-seok from AFP. Mr. Shim, hello, it's good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Could you first define Koryoin for us and our listeners? Tell us as well, what do we know so far about the number of Koryoin living in South Korea and overseas?
Sure. Koryoin, or Koryo saram, as we say, are descendants of ethnic Koreans who migrated to the Russian Far East, the old Russian Empire during the 19th and 20th centuries. Before they were forcibly transferred to Central Asia in the 1930s as part of Stalin's frontier cleansing policy. As Korea was under Japanese rule at that time, Stalin feared that Koreans living in the Russian Far East could serve as spies on behalf of Japan and resettle them to areas of the Uzbek and Kazakh Soviet socialist republics at the time. So over generations, the Koreans there sort of assimilated into those cultures, and many of them stopped speaking Korean, which was forbidden at the time. So there is estimated to be around 500,000 Koryo saram living in the former USSR, while the Overseas Koreans Agency in South Korea estimates there are around 100,000 Koryoin currently residing in South Korea right now.
Right, so it's a significant number, and many of them, as we've said, they are stateless. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Can you tell us about the stateless Koryoin people and how they became stateless as well?
Right. It's actually quite unclear the reality is right now. First, we have to understand how big the stateless population actually is. So there's some reports and studies that say they're estimated to be around 50,000 of them, stateless Korean living in the former Soviet Union. But the experts I spoke to said this number in reality is actually quite unclear. You know, a 2007 South Korean government study estimated there might be 30 to 40,000, but we really don't know. But as to how they became stateless, we have to look at the old Soviet Union's ethnic policy, which on paper didn't really discriminate on basis of ethnicity. And so they gave citizenship rights to ethnic minorities like Koreans. But after the USSR's collapse, each of the successor states instituted their separate ethnic policies and undertook a sort of de-Russification drives. And, you know, the chaos, that sort of economic turmoil that ensued left many Koreans stateless. So not now exactly how this came to be. It really varies on each individual's circumstances, with many simply failing to register in their respective countries at the time. And some of these Koryoin appear to have been seasonal migrants in the Soviet Union. So, for example, they may have been registered in Uzbekistan, but may have been residing in Ukraine, for example, as agricultural workers at the time of the collapse in 1991. So in that case, many simply failed to return to their residences at the time, like, for example, to Uzbekistan at the time, or didn't have the money, and, you know, also didn't have the documents to gain citizenship in where they were residing, in Ukraine, for example. And they may have been reluctant to register retroactively, as many really can't afford to pay the fines that come with failing to register in time. So many of them have now been relegated to this statelessness limbo, which sort of deprives them of opportunities like education and other state services.
Right, so in all intents and purposes, they were assimilated into the country they were living in. But with the fall of the Soviet Union, there were complications, essentially, about citizenship and about how they would where they would settle eventually. And so with that situation came about this stateless Koryoin community. And as you mentioned, interestingly, there are many Koryoin in Ukraine. And since the start of the war there, many Ukrainian Koreans have come to South Korea as refugees as well. Can you tell us more about the stateless Koryoin people who are in South Korea? And they're facing quite a lot of struggles because of their stateless situation as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, in general, Korean, when we talk about Korean, they face similar types of discrimination that other Korean migrants, ethnic Koreans face in, the really hyper-competitive society that is South Korea. They're often othered and face difficulty assimilating here. And this discrimination often relegates them to, menial jobs, and the government's constantly changing immigration policies makes their visas really short term. But if they're stateless, on top of that, they obviously face even greater struggles. The people you were talking about from Ukraine, for example, they were given a special kind of permit to be here temporarily, but because of their stateless situation, they're in sort of a limbo right now. And the Korean government, to a certain extent, has put an effort to modify some of its existing immigration policies to help ethnic Koreans through more flexibility. For example, they removed some restrictions that allowed the lineal descendants to be entitled to status of overseas Koreans, regardless of generation. For example, in 2019, but Koreans who are stateless aren't really considered the de jure overseas Koreans. So they're not eligible to get a visa in the first place, the F4 visa or a working visa, H2 visa, which means they're not allowed to apply for residency or citizenship here either.
All right, so it's a complicated situation. So it's amid this situation that the Overseas Koreans Agency has announced plans to conduct this fact-finding survey on the stateless Korean population in the country. And it's for the first time in 18 years, as we said, since 2007, when such efforts were suspended. Can you tell us a bit more about this plan and why now? What does it aim to do?
This fact-finding mission I think it's part of the South Korean government's overall drive to strengthen linkages with overseas Koreans. It could be connected to the government's policy to secure a workforce given the country's rapid demographic decline. As to the stateless issue, as I mentioned before, given the sheer lack of information we have about the size of this population and their circumstances, there's a necessity to verify exactly how many of these stateless Korean are and with the situation they're facing. So, as you said, according to the agency, this is the first time since 2007 the government here is examining the issue, particularly in light of the discovery of several stateless Koryoin from Ukraine who were left vulnerable after the war broke out. There's a few hundred of them who have come to South Korea as part of the government's help. But the government plans to create support channels and policies based on the results of this investigation to help these people once it really has a better idea of the situation.
So, to learn more about the situation with a group that's been dealing with the issue of stateless Koryoin firsthand, let us now bring in Park Hae-sung, the team manager from the Department of International Development at Good Neighbors, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing assistance to those in need. He joins us via video call now. Mr. Park, hello, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me today.
So we've been talking about the Overseas Koreans Agency planning to conduct this fact-finding study on the stateless Koryoin population in the country. This is to expand support for the stateless Koryoin who now reside in South Korea. Could we first get your thoughts on the government's plan, and why do you think the stateless Koryoin people have become an issue in South Korea now?
Well, actually, it's a really good, great use for NGOs and institutions working for human rights and supporting, Korean people. Honestly, although it's a bit late, I think it's too late. And anyway, so I welcome our government plan to survey the Korean, population residing in South Korea. As you mentioned, it was almost 70 years ago, the government conducted survey, and it means policy and regulation we have discussed, even developed, based upon the very outdated information, which we cannot show the actual figures and situation of stateless Koryoin people in South Korea. And let me just point out one more thing. In the past years, the government actually announced various research and study plans for Korean people in South Korea, but not much was actually done. So the important key, I believe, now is whether this survey will be carried out and produce meaningful results, or it will stop and disappear like previous plans. And my colleague and I, with other partnering organizations, we have discussed a lot with National Assembly and also Ministry of Justice and other stakeholders about improving laws and the supporting programs for the Korean people. Everyone there, they agree on the needs for the better policy and support. But these issues often get pushed down the priority list always. The issue of the supporting stateless Korean people is not new agenda. Every year, bills are proposed in the National Assembly, but they often get shelved due to the end of legislative term. For Korean, this year marks the 80th anniversary of Korean liberation, and public interest is very high. That's true. And I hope this survey the government is planning will lay the foundation for the real change in support system for Korean people in South Korea.
Right, so can you tell us, for our listeners, about Good Neighbors and their projects for stateless Koryoin who now reside in South Korea and overseas? What's your role in these projects?
Good Neighbors International, we were founded in South Korea in 1994, and now we operate in over 50 countries worldwide. Our supporting for the Korean people is divided into the domestic, also international project, and myself is in charge of international supporting programs. And in South Korea, domestically, we identify and support the Korean people, household, and families who are in need. Most of them actually stateless Korean people, or also descendants of the independent activities. We provide them with the housing services and living assistance and medical cares as well. Since the Ukraine war, the number of Korean refugees in South Korea has increased, and it makes the ongoing supports are very essential. These are just a few of the things that we are doing in domestically. And internationally, we're focusing on three Central Asia countries such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and also Kyrgyzstan. In Kyrgyzstan, which is economically less developed and with lower population of Korean people, we selectively support vulnerable households and families. And in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, where there are so many Korean communities that are existing, we provide comprehensive programs including livelihood and job creation, and even including legal advice as well. Recently, we also launched a project to improve access to energy during the harsh winter season, and the temperature actually, go down even to the minus 40 degrees Celsius. This project includes installing a heating system and also connecting the gas pipes to the household. So we are currently providing benefits for around 300 people in Kazakhstan. Still, we are discussing with local government and partners in the NGOs in local level, and all many supporting us actually planning, also conducting now.
So yes, it's a wide-ranging, it seems, your support. But what kind of difficulties do the Koryoin actually face? Can you tell us about some of the cases of stateless Koryoin who reside either in South Korea or overseas? What difficulties do they face?
So if you visit, Good Neighbors website, you can find some stories and cases about stateless Korean people living in South Korea and also even Central Asia countries. But there are so many more cases we cannot actually make it public today we're talking about, stateless people, but, stateless people cannot reveal their identity, even their voices. Whether, they are living in South Korea, Central Asia, the situation is actually same in both places. They can't even rent a place to live without using someone else's name. If the landlord finds out, they could be evicted, so they live in fear and hiding from the many things. Their children, they are also struggling to go to school or get proper medical cares. Even though schools and hospitals might, accept them as a part of welfare service, the fear of being discovered makes them give up, even, trying someone to do. To live in South Korea as a refugee, they need their previous nationality. Means if we want to become the refugee in South Korea, you need previous nationality, which they don't have. Essentially, they live in life where their existence is denied, unable to even become a refugees. That's a real situation in South Korea.
Right, so your organization is trying to help them, but what struggles does your organization, Good Neighbors, encounter when trying to help the stateless Korean people? What kind of support does the Good Neighbors need in your efforts?
In a short term, absolutely we need, immediate support, sort of like a Good Neighbors NGOs for things like education and healthcare for Korean communities. Those, package services very necessary at this as a short term. But, as a long term, strong support from the central government is very essential. Right now, support for the Korean people is actually varies by local government in South Korea. For instance, Koryoin living in Gangwon province, might get fewer benefit and social supports than those living in, Gyeonggi province because each, local government has different benefiting and service system. These policies and support systems should be unified so that Korean people get the same help no matter where they live. And also lastly, I think it's very hard to say, but it's very important for Korean public. We must open and accepting Korean and even their rights. We need to make sure the National Assembly doesn't hesitate to push for the new law and policies because of public opinion and votes. I think those are very essential as a long term, as well as short term. Thank you.
Yes, so lots to do, but hopefully the government's fact-finding survey, as you said, it will be an important step in improving the situation for the Korean community, and it will hopefully help in your organization's efforts as well. Mr. Park, thank you for joining us today and providing your perspective on this issue. We've been speaking to Park Hae-sung from Good Neighbors. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Right, so Mr. Shim, let me bring you back in. Mr. Park there gave us a good picture of what the Korean people are going through and the efforts that are being made to try and help them by organizations like them. He described the survey as a welcome step, but as we heard, there is more that needs to be done. It does seem like just a first step for now. In the meantime, what other ongoing efforts are being made by the South Korean government to support the Korean people in the country?
Right. Yeah, the government has been gradually modifying, as I said, its immigration policies to embrace members of the Korean diaspora, including, of course, Koryoin, who now make up a sizable portion of the ethnic Korean migrant population here. There are large Koryoin populations in Ansan, Gwangju, and Jecheon, where there are various efforts being made to support these migrants. Jecheon is particularly interesting as the local government there has been pushing heavily to attract Central Asian Koreans to sort of offset its rapidly shrinking population. So the city, for example, offers free lodging and meals for Korean for 4 months while they're getting settled, and also provide Korean language education programs and cultural programs, as well as help them secure work visas, child support, and medical care. And in places like Gwangju and Ansan, there are NGOs that they're taking the lead really in supporting the Korean community there, which is actually quite large, helping to serve as the bridge between government initiatives and migrants coming to find work in South Korea.
Right, we heard from Mr. Park, but I understand that you have also been speaking to historians and human rights activists who specialize in this Korean issue. What have they been saying to you? What have they said about what more should be done to support the Korean?
Yeah, I mean, the experts I spoke to generally expressed wide agreement in terms of what kind of programs are needed to support Korean in South Korea in light of the country's shrinking population. So they pointed out issues like the need to provide longer-term working visas. It's sort of in a more flexible way than it is being applied right now, as well as, programs like bilingual programs to help them assimilate in different communities here in South Korea. And as Mr. Park mentioned, so there needs to be sort of a unified government-wide policy that doesn't vary according to the region where these Korean are living in, because their local communities have very different policies. But as to the stateless Koryoin issue, the experts I spoke to were kind of more divided on as to how much the government really should step in to intervene in this situation.
Right.
Because there's an issue of taxpayer money being expended. The point here is that the government is trying to, if the government intervenes, it would be helping these ethnic Koreans secure citizenships of other countries, not becoming Korean citizens. So, which of course may create diplomatic issues of their own. Many of these people have been prevented so far from changing their status due to the heavy fines incurred by the lack of registration. And Mr. Park mentioned, for example, they have to live in hiding, for example. So this is because of the fines that they need to pay if they decide to become permanent, actual citizens of that country. So, and to support these people, for example, the South Korean government would need to use its own funds to resolve the issues, which creates a financial burden, which I don't know if the taxpayers of South Korea may necessarily support. So, and the question is, how beneficial would that be for South Korea itself, given that these Koryoin then would be citizens of that country rather than come to South Korea to work here. So, but experts have agreed on the need, definitely a need for a deeper investigation on the issue, and this is why the government is pushing for its probe into the stateless Korean issue.
All right, so there are clearly a lot of factors to consider. We'll see what more steps the government continues to make to address this issue moving forward, whether this administration or the next. For today, we will wrap it up here. Once again, we've been speaking to reporter Shim Kyu-seok from AFP. Thank you once again for your time today.
Thank you.